Not yet.
Give it a minute. Give it a
Give it
minute.
one more minute for people to log on, Jodi.
Okay.
And good. Okay, welcome everyone. It's such a blessing to see you all joining us here. Wow, what an amazing group. We're going to give it just 1 minute for everybody to be able to log on, as I see people are joining fast and furiously. And then I will turn it over.
We want to make sure people mute. Can we?
Yeah, Caitlin is on top of that. So I want to begin by introducing Caitlin, who is our Zoom leader extraordinaire. Any questions you have, you can place into the chat, and we will do our best to get to them. We're also going to try to give an opportunity for people to ask their questions live. So God willing, we will get to that point where we can take a few live questions. Wonderful.
Welcome, we're going to record.
It is, Terry. Welcome, everyone. Jodi, please take it away.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Jodi Wenger, and I chair the B'Tselem Committee, Inclusion Committee at Temple Emmanuel. We work to create a community where all people are able to participate fully. And I wanted to begin by thanking Terri Schwartz-Russell, who helped arrange this morning, emailing Mimi, and helping arrange for Dr. Spack. Shortly before I read Mimi Lemay's letter to her son in the Boston Globe in 2015, I met a new family who had recently adopted a couple of foster boys. The boys were tough in terms of behavior, probably because of the very difficult family situation they emerged from. The foster parents were, though, incredibly devoted and supportive of these boys. The middle boy kept insisting she was a girl and was now intent on girls' clothes only. And I had to ask myself, could a child this young really have a sense of gender dysphoria? Or was this just an active imagination or a way to get back to his biologic mother? Miraculously, Mimi's letter appeared in the Globe, and I was convinced this young boy was sure he was a girl. His foster parents, opted to adopt him and were very supportive. They changed the school. The young boy chose a new name and became a young girl. Mimi reveals her story in compelling and exquisite detail. She parallels her son's transformation with her own out of Orthodox Judaism. Mimi is a member of the Parents for Transgender Equality National Council at the Human Rights Campaign Fund and holds a master's in law and diplomacy from the Fletcher School of Tufts University. I'm so glad to welcome her. Rabbi Robinson will conduct the discussion with the help and inclusion of Dr. Norm Spack. Dr. Norm Spack is a pediatric endocrinologist, a renowned pediatric endocrinologist from Boston Children's Hospital and co-founder of the hospital's Gender Management Service Clinic. Dr. Spack, I met you many years ago during my residency, and I wanted to hear you talk ever since. So I'm so glad to have you both here today.
Thank you so much, Jodi, and thank you so much, Mimi and Norm, for joining us. We are just so excited to be able to learn from you this morning. Mimi, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your journey. One of the things that struck me so powerfully was your openness as a parent, the way that you love your child with such beautiful devotion. And I want to ask you if you could share a little bit with us about your story. How did you get to where you are today?
Thank you, Michelle. I would love to. And I want to extend a thank you to Jodi as well for that beautiful introduction. I am so pleased to be here today. My journey began, I didn't realize it, but it began a lot earlier than my son coming to me at the age of 2.5 and saying, I'm a boy. You made a mistake. I am no girl. I am not a girl. I'm a boy. And for me, it began in Israel in 1976 when I was born and grew up in a very ultra-Orthodox community, a community that's very highly gendered in many ways. And although through my early years and teen years, after a short rebellion period around the age of 10, 12, I became devoted to my faith. But unfortunately for me, that meant having to accept my place as a woman, which was secondary, auxiliary in this community. I was literally the Ezer Kenegdo, the helpmate to a future husband. And that was what I was being groomed for in my Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Jewish high school and in my seminary training. But having a very curious and intellectual mind as a young person, I loved the Torah learning, the little scraps and pieces that we were allowed to do. That's what lit my heart on fire for my faith. And that was something that would be eventually denied me because the men in the community were the ones who were meant to sit and learn and interpret the Torah as a living document, whereas the women were just meant to uphold the home and make sure that their children acquired the faith. And it was that ultimately that broke the link between me and my faith. And I ended up after a quite disastrous, at the time, quite fortuitous, looking backward, broken engagement. At the age of 20, I left my home in Gateshead, England, where I had gone to seminary and my mother had ended up marrying somebody from the community, and came back to Boston University. Ended up meeting a lovely young man who I'm married to this day. He's Catholic, so we are a blended family, and had one of what I thought were 3 baby girls in quick succession. And my middle child at the age of 2.5 came to me and said, "You wrong, I a boy." And when I first heard this, it did not register at all. I did not know the word transgender. I knew the word transsexual. To me, it was a word with a lot of negative connotations based on cultural memes, based on the very few instances I had seen somebody on TV or in a movie. And you have to think Silence of the Lambs, because that was the only introduction I had had. I knew barely anything about the word. And to me, the thought that a child could be transgender was not even a passing thought. But after his continued insistence that he was a boy, accompanied by his increasing sadness, anxiety, so many behaviors of withdrawal and anger, more than your typical 2-year-old, and eventually more than your typical 3-year-old, my husband and I turned to each other and said, we need to figure this out. And so about 7 or 8 months into our journey, we started Googling. And Google wasn't a lot of help. But my husband did find a video. It was a TEDx talk that had come out in 2013, Norm. And he said, look, you can have a 12-year-old who knows what their gender identity is. And he had seen your video and featuring the twins, Nicole Maines and her brother, who I have had a chance to meet and work with their dad. They're a lovely family. And so we had something a little closer, approximation. We had somebody who had reached the age of puberty, a young person who was transgender. And so that was one of our first clues. But it was mostly seeing what was going on with my son, seeing him withdraw, going from a happy, what we called a Buddha baby, just so chill, so happy, so joyful as a baby, to a very sad toddler, with the insistence that he knew what his gender was and we were wrong. That really finally enabled me to say to my son, who are you and what can we do to support that? And after a lengthy process of discovery and pain in our family and fear on our part, he said, I want to be a boy named Jacob. And so he has been since that day when he was 4 years old. And we have had the support of our communities. We have had the support of Dr. Spack's clinic. And he has come to life in so many ways. He is an absolute joy now at the age of 10, interested in advocacy, wanting to be part of the brighter future that I hope we can provide him. And I am so honored to be on this journey with him, because the alternative of not supporting him and having him end up as one of those statistics that we know about, the transgender kids who don't do so well without their family support, that was just not an option. But I think it was growing up in my Orthodox community, seeing the way I had been told from a very young age, this is the design that God made for you. You are designed as a woman. Even your body is designed to accept the will of others. And realizing that that was not something my soul could live with. We talk about the soul a lot in Judaism, and it's something that I firmly still believe in, even though I'm no longer Orthodox, that if we have a purpose in this world, and if God created us for a purpose, it is to fulfill our soul so that we can become vessels for good for others. And when your soul is trapped, when you're told that you have a certain role in life that you know is not who you really are, then your soul cannot thrive. And I saw that miracle with my son, and seeing that and realizing that there's no way he could have survived in the community I grew up in, that gave me my own redemption. I forgave myself for leaving for the first time. And it brought my own version of Judaism, the genuine Judaism that I love, back to me.
Wow, that is such an incredible testament. I want to ask you a little bit about that rooting in Torah that you brought out. Famously, there is a verse in Bereshit, that in Genesis, that says, Zachar v'nekeva bara otam, right?
Mm-hmm.
God created the human being as male and as female. And that has been used in a traditional context over many years to say you are born how you are born. God has a will, God has a purpose, God doesn't make mistakes, male and female. But the verse immediately before it speaks about Demut Elohim asa oto, that each of us are created in God's image. Mm-hmm. And who we are is how we are. And our ancient rabbis have this amazing text that they bring to bear in their interpretation of these verses about the idea of us as human beings having been created, perhaps with both a male and a female aspect. How do you relate to those texts? And are there ways in which they're challenging for you and ways in which you found strength within them?
I look at a text like that, knowing now that gender is a spectrum and seeing confirmation of that. And if the ancient rabbis had interacted, well, they had interacted with some transgender people. They are listed in the Gemara and the Mishnot, but the fact that Zachar v'nekeva hu barotam is almost a proof that we have both feminine and masculine aspects to ourselves, and that there is a spectrum, and that spectrum reflects something about God. And in my book, I don't want to give too much away, but there's a chapter that follows a dream that I have about my seminary learning, where there are Bible verses that come to me, and when I wake up, there is suddenly like a blinding bolt of lightning. There's a new interpretation that perhaps God too, in his own way or her way, is evolving. Just that we are supposed to find the person that we will become. And that person is not predetermined by any reproductive organs or station in life. that we are placed into, that mold that we are poured into at birth, but that the job of becoming, discovering who you are, and perhaps male and female identity and where you are in that spectrum is part of that journey, is part of life's journey and process to becoming the people that we're meant to be. And I think that the text reflects that.
Wow. So that presents a really beautiful goal for each of us in our lives. How did you come to this sense of the world as engaging of us and asking of each of us to be in a process of becoming? You spoke about that moment when you saw Dr. Norman Spack's video, and that was a tremendously helpful influence on you. What were your other influences? How did you get there?
I think that one of the most powerful moments for me was realizing that having a transgender son meant that I needed to fight for his rights. Pardon me. And, you know, being drawn into the fight here in Massachusetts for public accommodations, meeting all the advocates that I met on my journey, and realizing that this was a life's work, that I couldn't sit by and just say, I'm supporting my son, he's going to be okay. Because the truth is that out there are millions of transgender people in the world who aren't supported, are harassed, and equality means for all of us, or none of us are free. And I truly believe that. And so knowledge of acceptance of my son, the joy that I feel in him is not enough. It has to turn into Maisa. It has to turn into action. And when you look at the words of Hillel Hazakin, the elder Hillel, when he said, Imani mili, kshani la'atzmi azmani, ve'im lo achshav imatai. So if I do not stand up for myself, who will stand up for me? But if I am just for myself, then what am I? And if not now, then when? I feel that is the advocate's creed. And I think that this is embedded in Judaism, both traditional and in modern Judaism, is that knowledge needs to lead to action. Whether it's with climate change, whether it's with immigrant rights, or whether with transgender rights. So I think that has been a huge influence for me. And I feel in some ways that I've reclaimed the genuine roots of my Judaism in my activism.
Thank you for that. So I want to turn for a moment to you, Norm. Here you are, and Mimi was a parent knowing that there was something in front of her that was real, that she had to open up a different place in her mind for. And there you were, and she found you, and she found your teachings, and she found your words. And so many parents have lived that story. You were a pioneer in this field of supporting transgender teens, transgender children. How did you develop your passion for gender transitions and helping people to go through that and helping really to change our cultural approach and our medical approach? What's your journey, Norm?
It was a process. You know, when I was doing adolescent medicine, I was also doing a lot of endocrinology. And my role within those departments was very much oriented to kids who had lost the ability to procreate or go into puberty inappropriately early. And I got very familiar with how to adjust hormones to either block premature or help kids who did not have gonadal function to be able to pubesce. I then moved a little bit, added to that when I had formal endocrine training at age 50, that I became the person who was the go-to person for infants born with indeterminate genitalia. And I have to say, I don't just laugh, I shudder when I hear about these gender revealing parties that lead to nothing but a forest fire. because of the number of kids I know who either for their identity reasons will not remain in the gender that the genitals show, or they have a significant issue which we have to help decide what would be the right. Because one way that helped me think this through as to what the dilemma was is that whether you're male or female, your gonad started undifferentiated. It took a left turn or took a right turn, and with
Can you pause there for a second? Because I think that's a little piece of science that they don't teach a lot in school. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Well, the undifferentiated gonad is the anlaga for either the testis or the ovary. And it's not fair to say, but if nothing happens to it, it'll go the direction of an ovary and an external female genitalia. But with an appropriate hormonal stimulation, that gonad will differentiate towards the testis. And if so, the whole cascade towards external genitalia of a male follows through. So I started to realize that for those kids who have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, or none of this and all of that, and it doesn't fit or whatever, it always amazed me how pliable many of these kids were in that they didn't go through life without a gender. Something worked for them. And so I think what I have to say is that everything I learned from my patients, because I didn't know a hell of a lot before. And in helping them go through the process, as I learned how to do it, was the most satisfying thing I ever did in my professional life, because it was the closest thing I could have to giving birth. It's literally, these kids blossomed into who they really always knew they were. My first patient was a grad student from Harvard who he was born female, but couldn't transition with his parentage in the Midwest and Jewish couple. And 2 years after graduation, when he was at Harvard, his three roommates all knew the story about him. They just regarded Marcy as Mark. And that's it. So. They didn't have to know anymore, and that's how they treated him. But he couldn't find someone to treat him. So that when he came to me because people had said, there's a guy he's a pediatrician, but he'll take care of people up to 25. And he knows a lot of endocrinology, and maybe he'll give you your male hormones to help you virilize. And so he did. And he became a good friend as well. So to show you the role of rabbis, he married someone who was born male, transitioned to female. They married. Now they showed up for marriage licenses and nobody said, wait a minute, because they didn't ask for birth certificate. They said they saw a man and they saw a woman, and after that, that's it. You get the license. And who married them? A conservative rabbi. Sadly, Mark took his life about 4 years later. And that same rabbi buried him up in Haverhill. But Mark and Michelle came and taught at Harvard Medical School and countless venues. What happened then was that it just so happened that a number of physicians who used to see trans patients stopped, moved, died, gave up practice, retired. They were no longer available, and the social workers who needed to refer them to somebody medically didn't have anybody. And the word got out that I was doing this. Now, I was doing this on the weekends, because I was started to take care of people age 50 and 60. And I asked my mentor number one, the founder of the endocrine division, who was then in his late 80s and retired, I said, what do you think? He says, I think you should treat them. I said, how come? He said, because we pediatricians often don't see the end result of treatment delayed and treatment denied, said just like a lawyer. And then he put his arm around my shoulder after a conference, because I used to bring these patients in so that others would talk to them and see that they're just normal people with this particular challenge. And he said, put his arm around me, he says, Norman, I know all the training you've gotten in my department and before that at Rochester. There isn't anybody who has this perspective that you do. Then he said, God put you on this earth to do this work. You have to understand, I was going from place to place around the country where the head wouldn't have anything to do with this. It's shove them to psychiatry. Dr. Kriegler, totally different. So I continued to see adults, and it was terrible. I was depressed whenever I left the office. These people were social disasters. They didn't fit in very well. They may have had to give up their family, their job, whatever. They didn't look very significant, very convincing, especially if they were affirmed females, starting out with a male body, because puberty had killed the chance that they could effectively fit in. And this is what I discovered when I went to Holland and heard that they were working with kids from earliest puberty on up. And what were they doing? They were shutting puberty down so that they could buy more time to be sure they're doing the right thing in a reversible way. And then around older, 15 to 16, they were switching the hormones to the gender that they wish to be. So now you have people born female who didn't start out with breasts that had to be removed. You had people who started out male, but never got those telltale signs of the face, the jaw, the brow, the whatever, that give away a male face. They don't have hair to be removed for the rest of their life, or hair that won't grow for the rest of their life from the effects of testosterone. And they were 10 years ahead of me, and they already had 10 years of experience with this. And they were using a drug, ironically, that Dr. Kriegler promulgated for isosexual precocious puberty, those 2- and 3-year-old girls who go into a full puberty before age 5 and end up stunted. And he didn't develop the drug, but he was the first to use it and write about it. And what happened? They stopped puberty cold. And then when the girls got to 12, they let puberty come in. They went through normal development for a girl, went into normal menses, normal cycles, normal fertility, and I saw them into motherhood. And there were no complications. That was a tremendous advantage, knowing that the drug they were using to block puberty did not have negative consequences later on. And in fact, the Dutch kids, I think there's some pictures in the TED Talk, looked absolutely fabulous, absolutely undetectable. And I said to myself, this is what I want to do.
So
this is what I want to do.
Along with that work, what have you learned over the course of your career about the human heart and our capacity for change?
Well, I agree with Mimi that gender is a spectrum. And I believe that and there's very minimal evidence for any of this stuff, that there's a point in the brain that determines it. And it isn't even so simple as to why because then how do you explain the identical twins where only one of them is transgender and the other isn't? But Dr. Kriegler and Dr. Folkman, the late Dr. Folkman, gave me a clue. He says, you You can be an identical twin, but you ask any mom of identical twins and they'll tell you how different they are. And it's also possible that how they are positioned in the womb can determine the degree of blood flow that they get in utero. And if the blood flow is particularly rich in a particular hormone, perhaps it has an intrauterine effect. We just don't know. If you want my opinion, I think that there must also be a gene for gender orientation, sexual orientation. It just doesn't manifest itself until the second decade of life.
Wow.
Let me tell you briefly about the Navajo.
Mhm.
There are cultures around the world where transgenderism is totally identified and sometimes revered. In India, there's a cult. There's the Navajo traditionally have honored people who either have gender identity issues or have physicality issues of intersex. And how do they honor them? They become like shoftim. They become like judges in the community, particularly arbiters in matters of marital discord. Why? They figured this person can see it from both sides.
Wow. So on that note of the different ways in which cultures over time have accessed transgender and the ability to be fluid in your gender, how have we today as Americans been good at supporting people in transitions, and where are we just failing? Where do we need to be so much better? And I'm going to ask both of you to answer this question.
I think we are as divided on this issue as we are on anyone else. I don't think any Trumpers are likely to be supportive of transgender rights.
Unless they have a transgender child, in which case they likely don't stay supporting Trump for very long. I have seen that happen so many times. Yeah. Yeah. So to answer that question, I think that like what Norm said, I think we've become very divided on this issue. I think one of the most dangerous things that's happened in the last decade is for transgender people is also one of the most welcome changes for the LGBT community, which was the acceptance more broadly of gay and lesbian people in our society, and the marriage equality issue, because advocates will tell you that as soon as marriage equality was a losing battle for the conservative right, they turned to transgender people with bathroom bills, and those bills that say, you know, cisgender women and girls are not safe in the bathroom if we allow a transgender woman in. Now, we know transgender women are women, but the argument was made that not only are they not, but they were linked to sexual deviance and crimes and things like that. And that notion, that connection between transgender women and criminality or sexual deviance is one that is still being pushed. It's actually being pushed now and targeted directly at transgender children, because the last 5 years or so have seen defeat of these so-called bathroom bills. And now the next stage in the fight, the conservative fight against LGBTQ people, has turned on our kids, and the work that Norm is doing and the work that heroes like him are doing to save our children's lives is now at stake in many states around the country. That is specifically transgender children. There's legislation on the ballot in several states to stop people like Dr. Spack and parents like me to access these life-saving interventions for our kids. So I think that's where we have to continue telling truth to lies, to fiction. We have to continue speaking up, sharing our stories, and we have to vote. We have to get people in office who are going to pass a law like the Equality Act, which is going to transform the landscape for our families and communities.
Michelle, I just want to make one brief point, because the bathroom is not an unsafe place for either side of the transgender coin. Why? If you happen to be a trans female affirming a male identity going into the bathroom, you can't use the urinal just mechanically. So they go into the stall where nobody sees who they are. People think that the bathrooms are places of locker room equivalents. They're not. A male who affirms a female identity may, pre-surgery, be able to use a urinal, but not going to go into a men's room as a woman. It's going to go into the stall. So in each case, they are not visible and they don't want to be, and no threat.
Yeah. Then there's no statistics at all to demonstrate a lack of safety for cisgender people when trans people have their rights to go about in society the way the rest of us do. And in fact, the statistics are the violence against transgender women, particularly transgender women of color, is far higher than against many other groups, and that harassment takes place against them rather than by them, by and large.
Mimi, thank you so much. In just a few minutes, we're going to welcome Jacob here himself. And I want to give a chance for those who are here in attendance to ask at least one or two questions before we get there. So I want to ask you, if you are a participant and you have a question that's on your heart that you want to ask, if you could please use the raise hand function and Caitlin can call on you, or you could simply put a message in the chat that says, I have a question. Any questions here? Okay. Well, if we don't have any questions yet from anyone, I'll start the ball rolling.
I have a question.
I have a question.
We do have a question. Great. Carolyn.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mimi, and thank you, Norman, and thank you, Rabbi, and Caitlin, for this event. My 24-year-old is trans and non-binary, and on my own journey, which started at, when they were at a much older age than 4, so we run into some of the problems that you mentioned, Norman. One of my child's been amazing in educating me, which I'm sure was a burden for them, but they actually say that it's helpful for them to educate me, though not the rest of the world. And so they've let me come with them to a lot of different doctor's appointments, and they've, switched doctors a number of times. They went to Fenway Health for a while, feeling like there was more trans understanding there. Now they're at a trans health practice in Mass General, where they're very happy right now. But one of the questions I ask all the doctors is, what did you learn about medicine for transgender people in medical school? And they all say nothing. And that was part of the switch to Fenway, feeling like, well, if there's an expertise, maybe they have more expertise than anybody else, because nobody's learning this in medical school and they're getting practice. So is there any hope or beginning of a movement for doctors to actually learn in medical school about the medical treatment of transgender patients at different ages as well?
Norm, do you have, yeah, I figured this was for you.
It's a little hard for me to judge, because I'm not on the circuit around the country doing the lecturing like I used to, but it's clearly different now. And in Boston, I know that Harvard, and I know that BU, and I know that Tufts, there is, this topic is dealt with. And not only that, but it's a consortium, because the Boston City, Boston Medical Center, and Children's, and the Fenway are all linked in a way to give students who particularly want it a total immersion experience in transgender medicine. So it's happening. You know, I didn't know what I was getting into when I did the TED Talk, but it now has over 2 million views. And a good number of them are psychology course students and gender and women's studies students in colleges around the world. I was even checking a bag in at Heathrow, and the bag checker looked at my label and said, "You're the guy who did the TED Talk."
Wow.
Wow.
That's
So Michelle,
huge impact. I see that Jodi has a question
Yeah.
in the chat stream. And so the question that Jodi asks in the chat stream is for Mimi, can you discuss the relationships that Jacob has with friends? And then I'll actually ask you, Norm, as well to have a gloss on that from the global perspective of the patients that you're seeing. Mimi, please.
So that's been an evolving thing in our family. When Jacob first transitioned, he had another name beforehand, and he was in preschool, and you know the friends that we wanted to keep or that we knew we would run into every day, we had to tell them. And then at that point, everybody either said, "This is great," question mark, like, what is this? Because most people hadn't heard about transgender kids and transitioning at the age of 4. And now that's a topic that's more widely discussed. But we did transition schools as well. So in the new school, Jacob was not out on the surface, but because of the advocacy we were doing, with his permission, it was available. We did an NBC Nightly News piece. It was the most watched piece that they'd had on social media. And it's still, I think Kate Snow told me it still got the record back in 2015. And it's called Jacob's Journey, if anyone wants to look it up. And that was out there. So there were parents who knew, but I was very careful when we had new friends coming over. I kind of watched. I always Facebook stalked parents to make sure that I didn't get any bad vibes about whether they would be accepting. And then eventually, when he was younger, I would tell a parent and say, "Just between you and me." And the reason for that is because he was 4 and 5 years old. There might be toileting issues. There might be wardrobe malfunctions, and I did not want a parent caught off guard and to say or react in a way which would hurt my child. But when he became older, it became evident that I didn't need to tell people. And there was more information out there. And so now I don't really talk about it unless someone gets to the territory of a sleepover or, that quality of friendship. And even then, my son is 10. He's very self-sufficient as a child. And I don't think that he would not be able to handle it if something, went wrong with his wardrobe. And so I generally do not talk about it, but we are advocates now. He's an advocate. He was on national television in October asking Elizabeth Warren a question during the CNN HRC town hall in Los Angeles. So he's out there too. And he's had to field some questions from friends. Friends have generally been very supportive. He's never had a friend back out of a friendship because of it, thankfully. We live in Massachusetts. That's not the experience everyone has. And I now let him determine who we talk to and when.
Thank you. Norm, what about your experience in general with patients? How do they manage this socially?
I find that the younger they are, the more accepting other kids of them regardless. However, one of the things the kids lack is knowing other trans kids. They just aren't, they don't wave a flag, "Here I am." Now, they may meet some during a parent support group experience where there are other kids. But I think that in the future, I suggest that you invite and I'll be glad to come to Nick Teich, who started the first kid.
I know Nick. He's wonderful. Yeah.
And he's female to male, married, there's a baby, and he was a grad student when he started this camp, and he had to rent it, and he just bought a $4 million camp in Southwest New Hampshire. Sadly, they can't use it during the COVID business. But you want to talk about pioneers and heroes. He was bringing kids in from all over the country at free transportation, free camp, and they only had 300 counselor wannabes to get 15 counselors. It's an amazing story, and these kids are texting each other from all over the country all the time.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I see that Jacob has appeared in our screen. Welcome. We're so happy to have you. We want to hear your voice. What would you like to share with us this morning?
I don't.
Do you want to first just talk about, what your interests are? Because above all, you are a 10-year-old kid,
Yeah.
brother, dad to a hedgehog.
And a slug.
And a slug. And what are your hopes? Maybe what are your hopes for the future? What do you want to be?
I hope that everybody could be everybody could be seen as equal, and nobody would have to judge anybody because of sexuality, gender, race, disability, anything like that.
That's pretty powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you? Dr. Spack was just talking about Camp Aeronautic.
Oh yeah.
So we
I've
were
been there
signed.
before.
Yeah, we were signed up this year, and COVID happened.
Yeah.
But Nick Teich is absolutely an amazing human being, and you're able to have friends who are trans and friends who aren't. And what's the difference for you? Is there any?
I mean, there isn't really a difference. 'Cause, I mean, we don't really talk about it that much, but yeah.
Yeah.
I still, whether they're trans or not, they're both like same, kind of. They're both like the same.
Yeah, yeah. Does anyone have particular questions? Maybe do you want to answer some questions?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Please, anyone who has any questions for Jacob?
So Jacob, this is Terri. I wanted to know how your sisters took, how they reacted to this whole thing.
Well, yeah. Actually, my older sibling recently came out as non-binary. They go by Eli now.
Do you want to explain what non-binary is?
Non-binary is when they don't identify as a boy or a girl. They, and they use they/them pronouns and sibling.
And how did they deal with the transition when you were younger?
When I was younger, they were. How do I say? They were kind of. How do I?
Well,
I don't know how to explain.
Well, maybe in the beginning, Eli was like more sad because they were your older sister at the time, right? Now they're your older sibling. Well, they were always your older sibling, but they hadn't come out yet. But how do they deal with all the advocacy that we do?
They so sometimes they wish they could do it, because I know some things that they couldn't do was like they used to not be able to do that much advocacy, and yeah.
But you get along with them most of the time?
Not really, but.
And that's your perfectly normal childhood experience.
I see a comment from Sigalit. Sigalit, if you'll take, Caitlin, if you can unmute Sigalit so she can share.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Jacob, for being so courageous and open and talking to us today. I wanted you to know that, Hebrew language is a binary language. And there is a whole project right now working on to make Hebrew a non-binary language. So you may want to look them up. I'm happy to send you a link later through Rabbi Robinson.
Great.
That's cool.
And I want you to know also that we have already out there in the world many trans rabbis. So if you're looking for Rabbi Michelle has done a great job, and we have a great synagogue and great community to support your spiritual growth. But if you ever have, specific questions for your specific issues, we can make that connection for you too. Okay?
Thank you, Sigalit.
Shana Tova.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sigalit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please make sure to reach out afterwards so I have your information.
Okay.
Perfect.
Great. We have time for one more question. Somebody would like to ask?
Let's see.
One more question? Caitlin, do we see anybody?
Deborah?
Okay, Deborah and then Glenn. We'll make it two because you both raised your hands at the same time. Caitlin, can you unmute her? Debbie.
She's unmuted.
Debbie, you're on. I can't see you.
Go to
Okay.
Glenn.
Why don't we transfer over to Glenn, who also raised his hand at the same time. Hi, Glenn, you're on.
Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov, and thank you, Michelle and Mimi and Norm and everyone else. I had a question about thoughts about timing for when to the person it may become apparent to them that they may be transgender. Norm, you had mentioned that you felt there was a gene that didn't become manifest until teenage years or later, whereas Mimi, you presented the more traditional when you were talking about Jacob and his age much younger than teenage years. So I was wondering what both of your thoughts were about timing.
When I referred to the second decade of life, I was referring to sexual orientation. Who you, or as Mark used to say, who you go to bed with, rather than earlier in childhood gender identity, which may determine later who you go to bed as. Is gender identity and its behaviors, behavioral correlates in play, et cetera, are very early. And while not all kids exhibit it, and there may be plenty of psychological reasons and family reasons why they don't exhibit it. But there are clearly, we have clearly seen it as young as 2.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that our experience with our eldest that Jacob mentioned, had occurred right around puberty. So I feel like, and Dr. Spack knows so much more about this than I do, but just anecdotally from the parents that I talk to, I feel like there's 2 stages in which it's likely to manifest. And one is when they're younger and first talking about their gender. And then the other is around puberty, because sometimes puberty is impending or it is there. And the feeling of wrongness is much more acute during that time. And so I think for my eldest, it was, we were tootling along fairly comfortable with the female being female, and then puberty hit and suddenly it was like, wait a second, this doesn't feel right. But definitely a lot of, Is that what you would say?
I'd say people come out as at different ages. I just when they realize that they're, whatever the gender that they realize they are.
Yeah, different ages. Very true. Yeah. Well said.
Thank you, Jacob, so much for that, and Mimi and Norm. I have one last question for the 3 of you, which is, this is the high holiday season, and at the high holiday season, we talk a lot about change. And Mimi, I'm really struck by the title of your book, What We Will Become, because you could have titled it, What Will We Become, as a question mark, but instead there's this really hopeful sense of a process of becoming that we're all involved in. Mm-hmm. Do you have any helpful advice at this season of the high holidays as we think about each of us becoming our most authentic self, on what we as a community can do to support people who are identifying themselves in their own authentic way.
I think we celebrate, if we can celebrate the changes that we see in our friends and neighbors, if we can encourage them to explore, whether it's something as kind of like a career change, or whether it's a new family makeup or gender change, to really embrace those changes that we see in our friends, and to help them see that we will be there for them no matter who they are, because the person that we love is who they are, and that does not change. And I think that with the support of friends and family, we were able to make these big transitions in our home. I had to make my transition on my own when I left Orthodoxy, but I know now that there are so many organizations that help young people who are making a transition out of ultra-Orthodoxy. And I think giving more time and energy and support to those, and making sure that people know that they are welcome everywhere they go is critical. I think we're all part of that process. It takes a village, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. How would you help your friends make changes in their lives that are positive?
What do you mean by that? Like,
I don't know, like Rosh Hashanah comes around and we all start thinking of, like, it's almost like we do those New Year's resolutions where, like, this is what I want to be. This is more me. I'm going to go into theater, or maybe something big, like you have friends, and I'm not naming names, but you have friends who are interested in transitions, like gender transitions. How do we support them?
I just respect their pronouns, prefer their name, Yeah, and not just for just like things they want to do. I'd encourage them to do like whatever they feel like. Let's say they wanted to do theater, I'd be like really proud of them, because that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
And I'd support all my friends, wherever their changes, transition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for that beautiful affirmation, Dr. Spack.
Well, it was Wes who, when I was having an Aliyah, said what I heard for the first time. Said, God, everyone was created, B'Tselem Elohim. All of us have been created in B'Tselem Elohim. And if we do that, we will have not only a sweet year, we'll have a sweeter year.
Amen. Well, that is what this community and this committee is about. This event, this learning event for our Temple Emmanuel community, has been sponsored by our B'Tselem committee, which stands for that very premise. And so I want to give Terri the final word as we speak about how do we continue, Terri? How do we take learning this change and become what we will become?
So first off, I want to thank Mimi and Jacob for your bravery and for being with us today, and Norm for really bringing all the science and reality to us. Your words were very, very important. So we will continue learning, and if people have have questions and want to see next steps, we'd love to take this further. So please let us know. You can email me, just send it to the temple, be in touch with Rabbi Robinson. And I just want to say that, today was our opening lecture for adult learning, and there's lots. We're going to be exploring all kinds of subjects during the year, and we hope you'll all join us. The fall program is online on the temple's website, and please explore and keep on learning with us. And Shana Tova to everyone.
Shana Tova U'Metuka. Our deepest gratitude to you, Mimi and Jacob. Our deepest gratitude to you, Norm, to each of you for the holy work that you're doing, to Jodi and the B'Tselem committee for sponsoring and supporting this morning, and to Terri for helping us continue to learn and grow throughout all of our lives. May we go in this new year season from strength to strength.
Thank you.
Shana Tova, everyone.
Shana Tova.